Why is it that quilts versus sleeping bags is starting to remind me of the American political system? Okay, now that's an exaggeration, but when you read the comments about quilts versus sleeping bags, well, let's just say it can get a little heated. So a few weeks back, I published a short where I boldly said that quilts are better than sleeping bags, and I realized that that is an opinion, and that not everyone shares that opinion, but it was a 20-second video for crying out loud. I can't get into all the nuanced differences of why I like a quilt over a sleeping bag, and so I made some bold statements. I said that quilts are better, that the back of a sleeping bag is wasted insulation, and that mummy bags make for terrible sleep. Now, obviously not everyone agrees with me, and there are plenty of other people out there, even professionals, that prefer a sleeping bag, so I thought it might benefit us to talk about it a little bit. First of all, I was surprised at how many people suggested that I don't know what a quilt is, or that a quilt is the same thing as a sleeping bag, which makes me think I need to clarify. So if you don't know, this is a quilt, but this is also a quilt, a backpacking quilt, or a top quilt as it's sometimes called. But mostly we just call it a quilt. It's very similar to a sleeping bag with a few key differences. Sleeping bags are just that, a bag. You get inside it, you zip it up, it's got a hood, and that's about it. Quilts, on the other hand, are very similar, but typically don't have a zipper, or if they do, it's a very short one at just the feet. Instead of turning the opening to the side like a sleeping bag, you turn the opening to the back and you let it drape over you like a blanket. And this is when I got a lot of comments very strongly suggesting that you can just open your sleeping bag up and drape it like a quilt. And that's true, you can do that. The hood might fall over your face, but in mild temperatures you can use an open sleeping bag like a quilt. There's just two problems that I see. When it starts to get cold, a draped sleeping bag is not going to serve you very well. And you might think, that's fine, just get inside it when the temperatures drop. And you can do that. But one of the things that I claimed and still believe is that the sleeping bags are restrictive, especially mummy bags. And so in my 20-second video, I claimed that a quilt was better if you toss and turn at night, because it's most like your blanket at home. And I admit that I shot this short rather quickly, and I didn't take the time to strap my quilt to the pad. So when I tried to demonstrate tossing and turning in the quilt, I pulled the quilt away from the pad. And what I did right there, is exactly what's going to happen if you just drape a sleeping bag like a quilt. And it's also the #1 piece of ammunition that commenters use to claim that quilts were stupid, even dangerous. That the moment it gets cold is the moment you're going to want a sleeping bag. So, okay. Let's talk about that. Okay, so it's winter in Utah and I got my 10-degree enlightened equipment quilt with me. I want to show you exactly how you can stay warm with a quilt even in the wintertime. Something that quilts have that sleeping bags don't is pad straps. This way, when it gets cold, you can strap the quilt to the pad and it will stay put even when you toss and turn. Quilts also have a drawstring with a draft collar that cinches down around your neck. This way you can eliminate drafts at your neck and at your back. Now, obviously this isn't foolproof, and if you really pull hard on a pad strap, it can still let in a draft. But it's not like this is going to be happening all through the night. And even if you let just a little bit of cool air in, close the draft and your body will warm back up the air relatively quickly, I promise you. Now, I need to mention that in really cold weather, you need a way to keep your head warm. Some of the time, a warm beanie will work just fine, but the rest of the time, you need something like this down balaclava. And you might be wondering, where do I even find a down balaclava? Well, you need to check out Garage Grown Gear, who is today's sponsor. Garage Grown Gear not only sells balaclavas like this one from Goose Feet Gear, but down hoods like this one from Catabatted Gear. They sell a wide selection of cottage-made quilts and sleeping bags, as well as all kinds of specialty backpacking gear you can't find anywhere else, like the down balaclava I mentioned a moment ago. What I like about this over a sleeping bag hood is that if I turn in my quilt, this turns with me while my quilt stays put. If I turn in a sleeping bag, unless the whole bag turns with me, my face is now going to be sideways in the hood with my wet hot breath steaming up the sleeping bag and my ear being exposed to the cold. And I know some of you are going to say just turn the sleeping bag to the side with your body. And I'm sure that there are some bags out there that this works really well, but for the most part I find it difficult to turn the bag with me. If I turn in the bag, because I can't put my hand down on the sleeping pad, I just end up rolling off the pad. But because a quilt is separate, I can turn inside the quilt and still stay on the pad. And what I end up doing is pulling the bag tight against my back. This crushes the insulation and can leave a cold spot, just like if I'd pulled the pad strap up on my quilt. And second, a lot of sleeping bags have less insulation on the back. In those bags, if you roll the bag up on its side, your back is still going to get cold. Which brings me to the most controversial reason why a quilt is better than a sleeping bag. Why do some sleeping bags have less insulation on the back? Because the back of a sleeping bag really is wasted insulation, and some bag manufacturers know it. That's what I said in my 20-second short, and that's the #1 thing that I got lambasted for. I had people claim that they have extensive cold weather training and that they can tell me right now that I'm wrong and that you're going to freeze if you don't have back insulation. They are wrong and they are right. You do need back insulation, but your sleeping bag can't provide it because insulation works by trapping air like a sponge. When you squeeze a sponge, guess what? All that air gets squeezed out. The same is true with insulation. When you lay on it, you squeeze all the air out. No trapped air means the insulation can't work like it's designed. Now, does that mean that there's zero insulation provided? No, even compressed insulation still has a tiny bit of warmth. It's just not enough. So when I say it's wasted insulation, it's because you're carrying all that insulation that you aren't going to use. It's like if you carried a whole roll of duct tape, but you knew you were only going to use one small strip. Or if you brought a whole pack of batteries, even though you knew you only needed 2 for your entire trip. With the sleeping bag, you're carrying insulation that can't work the way it's supposed to, and that's what I mean when I say it's a waste. But you do need back insulation. That's why sleeping pads have different R values, and it's why hammock campers use underquilts. The quilts hang under the hammock because if you put it inside, you would just crush it, making you very cold. In the same way, sleeping pads have insulation in them that can't get crushed because the air in the pad is holding you up off the insulation. So even in cold weather, quilts will still work, and I'll admit that they can be a little bit more involved in cold weather, but for some people, the benefits of a quilt outweigh the costs. But I wonder what you think. Do you use a quilt or do you use a sleeping bag? What do you like about either? Drop me a comment and let me know. Thank you to Garage Grown Gear for sponsoring this video. Check them out for a unique selection of both quilts and sleeping bags. Like, subscribe, and do all those other things, and as always, thanks for watching.